Hi, I'm James. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Curves adjustment layers to apply several different techniques to an image. So here we have a portrait where it's a tad too light, so we can get that fixed. The color balance isn't quite right, so we're going to fix that and then just give the shot overall a bit of an atmosphere by adding a kind of color effect. Then we're going to add a localized adjustment of contrast. So that's going to be using the mask that attaches to adjustment layers. So let's get started. So to open up a Curves adjustment layer, you just need to go down to the adjustment layer icon, which is a half white, half black circle at the bottom of the layers panel. And then from that menu there, you just need to select Curves, and then that opens up the Curves window. Sometimes that may be attached slightly smaller over here, and if you just drag that off, you get a slightly bigger view, which is a bit more comfortable. Okay, so what we're going to do first is just left mouse click kind of towards the center of that curve line, and then you'll see that by dragging that down, we darken the image, and then by dragging it up, we're lightening. And that's because we are in the RGB set of channels. So this is actually applying an effect to all the channels, so it's just working on things like contrast and brightness. So as I said before, this shot here is slightly too light, so let's just bring that curve down ever so slightly. So there you'll see the original, and then we've just darkened it off a tiny amount. Now, if you accidentally add a point that you don't want, all you have to do is hover the mouse pointer over that point and then just drag it away and it disappears. It's really nice and easy. So that's the brightness sorted, but for me, the image is still just a little bit bland. I'm really not too keen on these colors here, so what we're going to do is add a nice color effect. So just click on the RGB drop down menu there and then select blue. So with the individual color channels, you obviously have red, green and blue. When we're in blue here, if I drag that curve down, it actually adds yellow, but if I drag it up, it adds blue. So I'll just remove that point. So let's just have a quick look at red, and up, that gives us red. And then if we take it down, it's going to be cyan. So we actually have two colors in each of these channels here. So up again, that gives us the advertised color of green, but then down we get magenta. So let's go back to blue. These are really powerful ways of actually fixing color imbalances or adding color effects. Today we're going to add a color effect. So what we're going to do is just hover over this point in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm going to drag that up. So let's take it up to about 20 there. So what I'm actually doing here is adding blue to the shadows. Now shadows are traditionally colder than highlights, so what we're doing isn't too far out of the ordinary. It gives us an effect that the eye is kind of used to. And then let's go up to this point up at the top right hand corner. So what we're doing here is actually working on the highlights now. So if we drag it over to the left, we get blue, or downwards, we're getting yellow. So the same would occur here. So if we drag this over this way, the complete opposite, we get the opposite color. So we've really cooled down the shadows. So what I'm going to do now is just warm up the highlights there. So let's get that to about there. So if we just do a before and after, you'll just see there, it just adds a little something. It kind of gives it a slight retro look, and it's just a bit more interesting than the natural color. It was actually quite an overcast day when this image was shot, and the light wasn't great. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do now is just make it slightly cooler again. So we're going to go up to red. So I'm going to add a touch of cyan, and I don't want to add too much. Let's just add a teeny tiny amount. So I think that's going to be fine. It's not an exact science. It's about what you see and whether you like it or not. By warming up the highlights, which were really going to affect the skin, that's allowed us to cool down the image overall even more without really messing with the skin tones too much. So now if we use the eye tool there, you'll see that we've neutralized that very slight color cast that was in the shot. Let's just close that window down now, because what we're going to do next is create an S curve, which is going to add contrast, and we can't really do it to the RGB curve that we've already used in Curves 1 because we've lightened with it. So we just need to create another curves adjustment layer, because where we had darkened off slightly, what we need to do now is create a slight S-curve, but by leaving that point in place, it really skews what we're doing and it actually takes away some control. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So let's just drag that point away, and we're going to add more contrast than we actually want at this point. So if I just use the eye there for visibility, you'll see we're adding quite a lot of contrast. So let's switch that back on and close the window down. Now what I'm going to do is just reduce the opacity of this layer until I'm happy with the way it looks. So I think we'll go for an amount of about 50%. So where I'm looking is actually in this area here, the face and the hair. So I'm just using the space bar to bring up the hand tool so I can scroll around. So I think that looks just about right, but I don't want the contrast to apply to any other part of the image. So we are going to now mask this out. So that mask is already active. But one thing I've noticed just before we actually start masking is if I just zoom out slightly, we have this Curves 2 adjustment layer up here, which is above Curves 1, which is obviously the adjustment layer where we darkened the image and we added a color effect. So this increase in contrast is actually affecting that adjustment layer there because it's above it in the stack. So if you just watch the model there as I drag Curves 2 down below Curves 1, you'll see the color changes slightly. So it just warmed up a touch because it's not affecting this layer in the same way anymore. So now with that mask still active, I'm going to hold down Control and I to invert it. So there you'll see the effect disappears because it is filled with black. So now just hit D on the keyboard, set the default colors of black and white. If black is in the foreground, just use X and you can just toggle between the two. So we want white in the foreground and then hit B for the brush tool. So I already have a soft edged brush selected. Just by clicking on this icon here, you can set the hardness, and that brush is probably a tiny bit small, so I'm just going to use the right square bracket key to make it larger, and then I can carefully paint over just the hair, and you'll see a very subtle change in the face there. Let's use the left square bracket key, make a smaller brush. So if you happen to make a mistake at any point, just hit X on the keyboard, bring black into the foreground, and then you can just paint over that area because that's going to hide the effect, but we're revealing it right now. So we can check the quality of the mask we've just created. So just hold down the Alt key and then click on the mask itself over here. So you can see that it's not great. So we can just fix this and make it perfect. So we'll fill in all these gaps. And then if we just click on there, holding down the Alt key again, that takes us back to our normal view. So there you'll see we're just boosting the contrast of the face ever so slightly. It's a very, very subtle effect. But to make it too strong, it just wouldn't really work. So the face being the focal point, it's much more punchy than the other parts of the image. So that is 3 ways of using curves. So we've looked at how to change brightness, how to work with color, and also how to increase contrast and then use the layer mask that comes attached to the adjustment layer to localize that effect.